My name is Colin Harrison. I'm from the University of Nottingham in England, and so my perspective will be very different. I did ask Chris if we could organise simultaneous translation so that in this session it would be clearer what I was going to say to you, but he said that would be a little bit too expensive. But I think there are some commonalities between us. And I would start with the session, the wonderful session we had yesterday afternoon. Teaching is a political activity. And I would add to that, reading is a political activity. You know what happened in Cambodia when tens of thousands of teachers were murdered just for being teachers. You know that reading is a political activity, that burning books is a very powerful way of changing people's access to knowledge, and many of us know from painful experience that research is a political activity. And for you bright young things in the audience, I would say, here's a health warning. If you do research for the government, there are two rules. The first one is relatively easy, which is to do it how they want, which you usually specify in advance. And then the second is a bit more difficult, which is produce the results they want. Yes. That's more tricky. But I do think that policy can be influenced by research. A guy who was number 2 in our national, kind of the equivalent of ETS, went to work for the government and was in a meeting in the Treasury when somebody said, there's no evidence that that work with technology improves anything. And this guy said, you're wrong. He said, I can quote you in 2 minutes 4 studies that show the impact of technology on achievement. And he got £25 million for a project in the inner city in that 2 minutes. And excellence in cities came out of that. But no one outside of a rather closed circle knew how important that influence could be and how important those studies could be. So I agree with Tim, it's very hard to know whether your research is making a difference. The rather depressing title that you have before you, I wanted to rewrite, and I'm being serious for a moment. The government funded research into an initiative called Every Child a Reader, and I was involved in that evaluation. I'm going to say a little bit about it in a moment, and I also want to recognise Jill Johnson, my doctoral student, who made a very important contribution in our reading and writing of our part in that report. It was a big project. But we were desperately unhappy last summer when the government officials announced that the funding for Every Child a Reader was going to be withdrawn. What we were told unofficially was that the project, which was essentially very similar to response to intervention in this country, had not produced impact quickly enough. Now, isn't it interesting, if your dependent variable is teacher change, how long is it going to take for that impact, even if the program changes are brilliant and your structures are excellent, for that to impact student achievement? 18 months is not a long time. And our report came in at about 2.5 years, and the government announced that they were no longer going to fund Every Child a Reader. And that's the point at which I had to give this title. I learned very soon after that what was actually happening was that was a kind of rhetorical move, and that the funding was being devolved to the local authorities, to the school districts that were involved, and they could decide whether to spend it or not on continuing that initiative. And it was so successful that what we've heard informally, because we weren't able to continue the research, is that it is being carried forward. Because it was a matched funding model, the school districts put in 50% of the funding for training and delivery, and the government put in 50%, and then they said, our government 50% is still available to you, but it's come in the block grant. And you could say, well, it's evaporated if if you really want to say that, it's not earmarked. But those kind of very important differences will be very familiar to you if you've worked at state level and at government level. You sometimes get a tremendous mismatch between what is publicly known and what is privately known about what's actually happening. The Conservative government came in 18 months ago now, and there was a tremendous change in rhetoric. Some of you know I've done a lot of work with the technology agency called BECTA, the British Educational Communication Technology Agency. They've done work that was world-leading on supporting technology change in schools. And within 2 days of the Conservative government getting in, they closed it down. But it's interesting what happens. I was involved in a very large-scale project called Impact 2, which looked at the impact of computers in schools on school achievement. Now you might say, what was the impact of a pencil on school achievement? It's a very, very difficult area to research, but we had some brilliant people working with us, David Wood, Jean Underwood, Eric Lunzer, and no one wanted to do this research. We all thought it would be disastrous. I just went around some of the people I thought were the best people in the nation, and I said, if I can get these other people to work on this project, will you work on it? And they agreed to. When we got our findings, which was that there was impact at different age levels and in different subjects, but not global impact. The government was so distressed that we heard they were going to suppress the report. And then some people said, actually, wouldn't it be a problem if there was a global correlation between information technology and school achievement? Because we know that there are massive differences between the availability of technology in different schools. And broadly speaking, richer schools with higher achievement have more technology. And so we argued that that our variation across a range of schools was actually a better guarantee of the fact that our data meant something. And that I was told 8 years later, it was a desperate time, when you're being told your report might be junked. I was told 8 years later that project was regarded as a jewel in the crown of BECTA's research. No one had actually thought to tell me that in the 8 years that followed. But these things are very important in terms of understanding what happens at national level. The number 2 in the education department, the number 2 in the Ministry of Education is a guy called Nick Gibb. And after this decision was made to close BECTA, he was interviewed on BBC Radio, and someone said to him, Mr. Gibb, you've been accused of wanting to turn the clock back 50 years. And that was true. I'd accused him of it, so that was but his reply was really interesting. He said, can I confirm that that's exactly what I want to do? Standards were higher then, teaching was better, and that's what I want to take us back to. So that's what we're up against. It's very, very challenging, very demanding. Now, instead of, 2 years ago we just said, would you mind turning your phones off? And of course what I'm saying now is you have my permission to rush to the front and photograph this QR code. My QR code reader on my phone immediately tweets the link. So I'm very careful about what QR code I get, because it could just be, for a sandwich in Asda, because that's then tweeted to the whole world. So that is the report that I was involved in writing on Every Child a Reader. And it's an example of current work and what happens to current work. It was something I was very proud to be involved in. There's a very big team. We're going to post this online, and you saw I also gave the URL to the report, so that can be downloaded for free. It's not a good idea to hang about when you see those URLs, because in my country, every time there's a change of government or a change of minister, they change half the website, and you can't find your own report. But Every Child a Read was a very, very important project. It went into 90 local authorities out of 140. And what it tried to do was support kids who were falling behind in reading in one of 3 ways. So wave 1 was having quality first teaching, as happens in in this country and in my country, every 15 years or so, there's a sort of moral panic about phonics, and it's not being taught determinedly enough, often enough, and early enough. So we have a lot of that, and as many of you will know, we have a lot of emphasis on the simple view of reading, which was brought in as part of the new policy. But the good news is, whereas Phil Goff's view of the simple view of reading is, kids come knowing the language. What they need to know is to be able to decode, and then they'll be able to read. The emphasis in our project on improving comprehension as well as phonics is actually, broadly speaking, benevolent. So everyone gets that. Small groups that need additional literacy support get small group intervention, but then very importantly, a very significant number of kids get reading recovery. And I'll tell you, as it were, I was going to say privately, I didn't make it public that my expectation going in was not high. If you want, we know, from since the 70s, delivering massively complex curriculum interventions on a cascade model nationwide is incredibly difficult to do. And broadly speaking, your expectations are that it will be thinned out and may fail. And we didn't find that. What we did find was that this evaluation found incredibly well-trained teachers, and that the model had worked. The delivery of reading recovery training using local people who've been trained by the University of London was very, very successful. The model was successful, and the kids are learning. And if that funding can be continued, the success story will continue. So I'm going to stop at that point. Thank you very much.